Rotorua, ko Tania Tepsula Ho, ngā mihi tēnei kia koutou katoa ko tai mai I tēnei rā. I'd like to invite Mrs. Rothwell to start our meeting with the prayer.
E te ātua kaharawa, ko koe te tohu rangatira te toi mā toronga. Mana ki tia mai mātau wa pononga I tēnei wā, I mahi nei mahi mātau mahi, mō te pānga o ngā tangata o te konihira o ngā roto o Rotorua. Tākua mai kia tau ti rangamarie, ki runga I a mātau I ngā wā katoa. Ko ihu, ka raiti hoki tō mātau ariki. Āmene.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Rothwell, and she, of course, is our representative from the Rotorua Lakes Community Board. Thank you very much for opening up our meeting. I'd like to welcome everybody here, welcome the public who's here and the media, and all those who may be live streaming to us today. Just a reminder for mobile phones to please be turned off, and we will take a break for morning tea and then lunch to allow you to clear messages and freshen up. So the first item today is apologies. I call for any apologies. I do have one from Raj for being, who'd be here just slightly late due to another commitment. Yes, Mrs. Bray.
Mr. Waru.
Yes, thank you very much. An apology from Mr. Waru. Are there any other apologies? There appear to be none. Moved by Mayor Chadwick, seconded by Councillor Donaldson. All those in favour, please say aye. Thank you. Carried. Any declarations of interest this morning? There appear to be none. We move to urgent items on the agenda. Any urgent items for us? Yes, Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just with regard to the first item on confidential relating to the variation of the contract for the lakefront, I think that should be held in public hearing.
I'm just checked with the Chief Executive and also our advisor, and just due to the nature of the information being commercially sensitive, it is correct that it should be held in confidential, but thank you for asking. Councillor McPherson.
Good morning, Chair. The first of two that I've got is I'd seek, if I could, through you to the CEO, about seeking an urgent update on the 20% blowout on the Hub 2 car park and toilet contract. Since that information came to us some weeks ago, has there been every effort to prevent this, to understand and then to prevent further blowouts? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor McPherson, for raising it. I do note that we have an item in the confidential where we will be discussing the contracts, and also we've asked for a presentation on variations, so we can go into more detail in there, absolutely. But I'll just pause there and just check. I'll look over at the staff and get a nod or a shake whether they want to talk about anything in here. Okay, and they'll give a further update in the operations report further in the agenda for you. Yes.
Thanks. The other issue, I'm awaiting formal notification, but I think it's urgent that we consider the need for a working party to be set up to reconcile the Code of Conduct with the Harmful Digital Communications Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McPherson. We'll note that and look to see what we can do for that. No, but we will, it's noted, and we will look further into whether we need to do that. So I don't see any other items. So we'll move to the confirmation of minutes, which is on page 6. I ask for a mover and a seconder for the motion that the minutes of the Operations and Monitoring Committee meeting 2nd July 2020 be confirmed as true and correct record. Mover Mrs. Rothwell, seconded by Councillor Wang. All those in favour, please say aye.
Madam Chair, excuse me, Madam Chair, I think...
Councillor Rokawate.
Yes, in the financial area there, or where did I see it? I just noted 7.1, there's just a typo there. The 11 months ended 31st of May, and then it says the 11 month ended 30th of April. So it's just a slight error there. 7.1's in the recommendation.
Thank you. That's Very well spotted, and we'll make sure that that correction's made.
Thank you.
Thank you. I put that motion to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Carried. Now we move to staff reports. We are on page 13 for the operational report for June to July 2020. I ask for a mover that the operational report for June to July 2020 be received. Moved by Councillor Donaldson, seconded by Mr. Hurd. I put that motion to the vote to receive it. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. We will start with Stavros Michael. I'll invite Stavros to the floor. He also has a PowerPoint for us this morning around footpaths and cycleways, and we are on page 14. So Group Manager for Infrastructure Group, Stavros Michael.
Morena tātou katoa. Through you, Madam Chair, thank you. I will leave the report largely as read and quite comfortable to take any questions related to that report by elected members. I do have a number of points I would like to make, especially with regards, and I'll start with regards to the ongoing work we are undertaking together with NZTA on state highways as the entry point to this report. I think it's also pertinent for elected members to be aware, probably you have seen in the media and the papers, that a consultation process is now undertaken by NZTA for the State Highway 30, which is stage 2 of the T9 Road improvements from Isles Road to the airport. And I think elected members need to get comfortable and be aware of what the intention is in that work, because no doubt members of the public may come to you and seek clarifications and so on. So very quickly to go through that, as you're aware, for the last couple of years, we have been working with NZTA to undertake ongoing improvements into State Highway 30. Stage 1 from Sala to Isles is in progress at the moment. Stage 2, business case, was completed last year, and of course now with the government infrastructure program, the CIP process, where about $55 million been allocated to Rotorua Lakes Council and NZTA. About $35 million will be dedicated to improvements on T9 Road from Isles all the way to the airport. There is a blueprint that eventually aspires to convert that section of the road from Isles to the airport into 4-lane state highway, as it should be. However, that will happen in stages. What NZTA and their consultants are engaging at the moment is that staged approach, where intersections like Bisley Road, Brent Road, Ofata Road, Wharenui Road, and Gears Road and the airport will be gradually be improved to the function that is desirable for that for the capacity for the state highway, especially the function that is able to accommodate the land development to the south of T9 Road and the Wharenui on tribal lands area. So the intention is for us to work together with NZTA to make sure that those intersections are gradually upgraded, and of course as you go through each intersection there are going to be consequent improvements to the east and west of each intersection to allow what we call vehicle storage and capacity creation. The preliminary intention is for these intersections gradually will be controlled through traffic signals, especially in areas like Ofata Road, and as opposed to roundabout. That will generate to some degree, by some people, a degree of discomfort because there are businesses on the sides of T9 Roads between Tarawera and Isles Road, especially where sometimes they get served by heavy duty vehicles, trucks, and so on. And as the state highway gets improved in terms of capacity and safety, the traditional way of entering into the state highway and doing a right turn through the media or doing a U-turn on the road will gradually be restricted. And the reason for that, of course, is quite simple. We want to develop that state highway to have the appropriate capacity and safety configuration for increasing vehicle volumes. Just to remind elected members, Tinai roads from let's say Sala to Tarawera carries about 45,000 vehicles a day. From Tarawera to Ofata carries about 25,000 vehicles a day. From Ofata to the airport, about 10 to 15,000 vehicles a day. What that means is that about 25,000 vehicles a day are distributed into the local area as they come out of the city or moving into the city. A good 70% of traffic is distributed in the local area for businesses and so on. And therefore, as we build more houses in that area, another 3,000 or 4,000 houses, the traffic volumes will continue to increase. It is simply not a good practice or advisable for a number of reasons, including safety, to continue to allow trucks to do U-turns onto a state highway that will continue to increase its demand. And if you have, on average, 30 to 35,000 vehicles a day on a state highway, having a very heavy truck, 20 tons, with 20 tons load, turning in front of you to do a U-turn or a right turn on the road is simply not advisable. The question will arise as to what are the alternatives. And we are at the moment working with NZTA to identify the percentage of such vehicles. We expect to be very low in the region of about 2 or 3% of the total traffic. However, you will get some people coming to you and saying, well, the improvements to the road stops us doing what we traditionally used to do, but we cannot have it both ways. We cannot have an improved road capacity and continue to treat that section of the road as a rural road. It's just simply incompatible. However, the CIP also allocated for us $5 million to do improvements to local roads like Vaughan Road, Morris Street, Lassie Street, and Limor, and so on. So we will use that money to do improvements to make sure if a truck, for example, comes out of a petrol station opposite Limor School and wants to come into the city, they can go all the way to Ofata, utilize Vaughan Road, come back in the intersection of Tarawera, and go back to the city in a safe way. But that means we will build pedestrian crossings and safe footpaths and traffic control system of Vaughan Road to make sure we're not imposing additional limitations onto the local residents in that area. So I don't want to go into a lot of detail, just probably because you will see the media information, probably some people will come to you. It is quite important to be aware that the overall principle here is to gradually improve Tinai Road to its function as a 4-lane state highway road that enables safe entry and access onto land development on either side. We cannot continue to have it operating as a rural road where people can do random movements into that because the traffic volume will eventually create a safety risk. Again, in terms of the CIP projects, also councillors should be aware that we have reached an agreement with the CIP process and NZTA that $55 million will be split, $35 million on State Highway Road, on Tinai, $5 million will go on to improving local roads, and $15 million will be dedicated to improving the stormwater community capacity for land development on the south of Tinai Road, on that land between Linmore and the East Gate. So we are required right now to develop our design plans and a detailed implementation processes to make sure we have a gradual improvement and gradual delivery path. The other element, just again, you might sort of hear some communications that, as you're aware, we do have a floating wetland just down on near our building here. That floating wetland has been in place for about 10, 12 years. It's begun to disintegrate in the recent times because of storms, and it's been assessed that it cannot be fixed, and therefore it's quite important to decommission, deconstruct it in a safe way. We started the process and we spoke to Tierra Lakes Trust, to Oakland, the Regional Council, the Department of Conservation, and so on. Everybody is comfortable with that process because we are replacing that wetland with Hannah's Bay wetland, a new creation to compensate for the airport resource concern that took place a few years ago. The only The only consideration we need to have at the moment is because it's breeding season of some birds that use a wetland. The Department of Conservation asked us to delay it until December to deconstruct, and we will do so. We'll work with the DOC to make sure we comply with that kind of requirement. I've got, can we have the sine wave ISO, please? Okay, I'll go very quickly through that. In recent times, people, and elected members been asking what to do with creation of share paths around Curau Park, and around the city and so on. Just a very quick reminder that obviously the cycleways program is one of the pieces of work we have been undertaking for the last 3 years at least, and we continue to implement it. Since 2017, obviously, we built 30 kilometers of the cycleways, and now we're working to make sure that our network is fully connected in an urban form, and also connect our north and south of the city to our recreational areas like a lakefront, Nokotaha, forest, and so on. Quite pleasing to see that we are observing through the monitoring station some 81% increase in commuters using those cycleways. And more importantly, I think the primary targets of addressing school kids. We've got about 15,000 school children between the ages of 6 and 17 into the district. And our goal is to have 10% of them going to school either by walking or cycling. And our cycleways share paths are designed to give access to these areas. And we are witnessing every year an increasing number of school kids using that. And that's got multiple benefits, both in terms of environmental benefits, health benefits, and obviously future capacity benefits. And you can see we are undertaking another program with school kids, and we do some fun fairs sometimes, and we do some things that are encouraging people to participate in a jovial way. And I think it's nothing better than kids get fancy dressed and participate into something, and as they do so, they learn safety approaches. And obviously, you can see some significant numbers of increasing of the use of cycling, going to various destinations. Again, perhaps some sort of trivia, but it's quite important to know that we've got about 70% of our users are male, 30% are female. 60% still use new share paths, while 10% still using comfortable and competent to use the roads, and still got 30% of people still using footpaths. And obviously, some of our old footpaths are not really designed as share paths, and sometimes we get some complaints of privatization not allows cyclists on footpaths. Technically speaking, that's correct, but at the same time, if people riding on a bicycle on a footpath and do so in a considered way and with not endangering anyone, is very little reason to actually become very hard in enforcing those kind of rules. But having said that, as we improve our footpath stock, we make sure we create more capacity for that area. And again, we take advantage every time we have footpath renewals, like in this case, as you see in front of you there. When it's time to renew the footpaths, we replace them with larger footpaths, wider footpaths to allow micromobility, disabled people, cycling, walking, and so on in a safer way. Obviously, we cannot do it all in 1 year. It takes a long time, but we're working through that direction. And again, remind all of us who do have a plan, we do gradually implement the network to make sure we reach key destinations in a safe way. And again, we are trying to provide facilities in the CBD to allow people to ride into the CBD with cyclists and safely park their bicycles and take it from there. That's a question. You want to talk about the footpaths now? Yeah. Can we have the footpath condition? Another element that we had I will introduce Regan Fraser, who is my 2IC. And another element that was a bit prominent recently is about the condition of old footpaths or existing footpaths and the approaches we're taking to manage those footpaths in a safe way.
Tēnā tātou katoa, and thank you for your time. So as Stavros mentioned, this is just an update for elected members to understand what we've got, what condition they're in, and how we manage them. So you'll notice we've got a substantive network, over 386 kilometres of footpaths, excluding our shared paths. Every year we have a condition rating which is applied to our footpath assets, and they're rated from 1 to 5. And that's applied to a 10% representative sample of what we have. We have a key performance indicator set by the Department of Internal Affairs, which is to have a condition rating of 4 or better for 98% of our network. And you'll note we exceed that KPI with a rating of 95. If you have a look at the graph as well, and you took out 4, it went just from 3 up, 95% of our network sits there. So how do we do it? Reactive. So reactive is simply, like many of our services, our members of public ring in. So that runs through our call centre. Our teams are aligned. We dispatch a contractor to assess it. If it's urgent and an immediate health and safety risk, it's scheduled for repair straight away. And if it's an emerging issue, a lot of infrastructure, sometimes you can go, that's going to be a really big problem in 10 years. So it's scheduled appropriately to have it sorted at that time. We do, however, also have a proactive and cyclic method where our contractors go around and inspect. Plus, of course, we have staff members out and about who will notify us. If there's an asset that's in really poor condition, it is then considered for a renewal as well ahead of time if we're noticing multiple faults on the asset. Our renewals is a nice new shiny footpath. So our budget is set at 1.2% of our network per annum, which is $500,000. That gives you a complete asset renewal within 83 years. You'll note the average life expectancy is 93 years. So what that indicates is that we've got prudent asset management to manage what we have while slowly increasing the level of service for our community needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we're ready to take any questions regarding our reports today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll start with Miss Bray.
Kia ora. So can you tell me the footpaths around town that have got the big bumps and the step sign to warn people, and it seems to be trees in that area, are they on your program to be fixed?
Yes, absolutely. As they're repaired, they're noted, and if it's not an immediate fix, it's then scheduled for when they think it should need to be. But we also continue monitoring just in case the deterioration increases.
Thank you, Ms. Bray. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Chair. Stavros, gentlemen, thank you very much. The Nongataha roundabout, can you give an update on that, please? Thank you.
Oh, yeah, my apologies, Councillor McPherson. Yes, when I was talking about the State Highways, also I intended to touch base on that. The NZTA and us are working on that, and the expectation is that they're going through the commissioning of contractors phase at the moment, and the expectation start to see work there in October, November this year. To that, $4 million on that roundabout. And also in September, just to remind elected members, we will start a consultation process with the Nongataha community about the village, Nongataha village, to arrive at an option to fit into our LTP. And so those things will be aligned together.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Rokawate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have 2 questions, Stavros, and it is around Tēnai and obviously the works that are going to be happening there, and there have been a lot of questions put to me about that. So we'll look on, and it's really from people who live around there, and I mean they're seeing what's happening and reading things in the paper and that. So are we starting to getting that communication underway pretty smartly, or has it already started? They seem to be concerned and not quite sure, and I don't know where they're getting their information from. Is it a drop in the mail or something?
Thank you, Councillor Ted. Yes, you're quite right, and the reason I mentioned it is because NZTA started yesterday the formal consultation process and communications process, and through that process we get feedback to finalize the detailed work that needs to be done, and also to inform people as to the outcome of that.
Thank you. And my other question, if I may, thank you, it's around the isolation, managed isolation, etc. Have we got any plans in place? Well, I'm sure we have, in the event of community transmission. What is that? What happens then? Does this city because that's something that we're being told could happen. Thank God it hasn't happened so far, but
Again, the lead agency for that process is the Ministry of Health, and obviously we work very closely with them. I don't really want to preempt the potential scale of community transmission, but there are various scenarios, under that consideration. Of course, an extreme scenario is a complete lockdown again.
Hence my question, is that a likelihood? I mean, I don't know.
I think it's probably a question for discussion later, but it's certainly something that this organisation is very aware of, and we have been keeping an eye on it. And we do, of course, have a great team in our civil defence should we need to move into that status again. So, yeah.
Yeah, all I wanted to say is that you're quite right. The Ministry of Health does have a range of scenarios to work from, and we're working closely with them.
Madam Chair, it's just that I do see a difference between the isolation one, managed isolation, and then certainly if anything should be absolutely in our community, and what that might look like, and also what role we would play as a council too. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Councillor Kumar.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and also I'd like to apologise for my lateness this morning. Thank you so much, Stavros and Reagan, for your reports this morning. I have a very simple question. When you be seeing all these renewals and these footpaths being made, are we serving the handicapped community well with the proposals they may have put forward as far as footpaths and roading accesses go? And just the other thing with the T9 road, just the other conjoining question, is with the T9 road construction that's going to take some time. How is it going to affect them, and how easily accessible can that roading footpath be for them in this time?
Thank you, Councillor Kumar. I think as Regan said, we've got about 350 kilometres of footpaths, and we replace them at a percentage per year. Every time we do a footpath renewal, we assess the needs of disabled, of people who need to have improved access, to these facilities. The simple question, are we doing fast enough to cover all our historical backlog? Probably the answer is no. But within the rate of our renewal processes, and where we are aware that a particular location is problematic to people with disabilities, we pay attention to that and do it as fast as we can. T9 Road, obviously, is a construction site, and the contractor there is required to maintain access, safe access, to all people. Again, I think it would have been sort of frivolous of me to say that in a construction site, there will be no inconveniences. I think the contractor are aware of, and NZTA are aware of the responsibilities to maintain safe access, as practical as it can.
Thank you. Your Worship, the Mayor.
Thank you, Stavros, and I particularly like the cycle education program in schools, and that is rolling out over time, because that's the feeder into your shared path network that I'm seeing people loving. My question to you is about the 55 million, and you talk about Sala Street to the airport. Does that include the roundabout? There was a slight discrepancy. Well, it was very exciting when the political announcement occurred that, we would include the roundabout. So how are we going with getting that added in, as well as the other fixtures that we're looking at along T9 Road?
Thank you, Your Worship. Our standard approach to that is that the airport and Eastgate intersection is included into the business case for improvements. $35 million may not go all the way to that, to cover all that, but NZTA must fund, from their own sources, that ability. So NZTA officers who manage that project, myself, have a very clear understanding that we have not signed up to improvements only up to Whanganui Road, for example, our improvements up to the airport. Now, the relevant officer in NZTA is sourcing that funding to make sure the business case will cover that.
So we have to keep supporting that approach. Thank you. And a little question on the wetland. I remember when they were proposed and they were the answer to soaking up the nitrogen. Are we doing any nitrogen assays on the loading of the wetlands as we dismantle them to see if they actually did? Were they effective?
We have the Regional Council and Alison Law, who's our scientists in our laboratory. Yep. We're really detailed about that. And you can read a lot of documentation about their assessments. So yes, we are assessing the effectiveness of flooding wetlands. But also remember too, we are into a concerted effort to develop new wetlands on the periphery of the lakes. It seems to me to be at this point in time, from the evidence in front of us, that floating wetlands are not as effective as wetlands near the edge of the lake. So that's why we're migrating in that direction.
Ms. Bray.
Stavros, it's such a huge roading project that's going to take place out there, obviously. NZTA and your team, have you discussed holding some community hui with the east side residents?
Thank you. I think they already have been community huis about that, and will continue to be as the work progresses. I think, as Councillor Tite, said earlier too, it's quite important for that communication to be ongoing, and the communication has to be both person to person, through meetings, through media, through publications. So it is very critical for that, I agree.
Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And yes, there have been community hui. There were 2 here last week, and members of the community were learning about whether they'd lose their front yard or not, and how close they'd be to the road. So that's ongoing. But my question, Madam Chair, was through you, Stavros, is what is the regulatory environment around misuse of shared pathways? And I've received some communications about motorcycles on the Utahina track and the trail, the shared path up through Mangakakahi. Are they regarded, is that under the Transport Act? Do we have a bylaw that's applicable, and who's responsible?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Donaldson. As you recall, maybe about 6 or 8 months ago, we actually came to the council through a bylaw, and we made definitions about the shear paths, who can use it or not, and certainly motorized bikes are not allowed to use them, because obviously they move at a speed that is not compatible with pedestrians or disability scooters and so on. The ability to enforce them sometimes is a little bit is a bit low, because these things happen and you don't have an enforcement agency on the spot. But certainly our discussions with the police reinforces the message that the bylaw does not allow the use of sheer paths by motorbikes, and to the best of our ability, working with the police to make sure the message is conveyed appropriately.
Thank you very much. We have Councillor Wang, followed by Councillor Yates, and then Mrs. Rothwell. Councillor Wang.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. Thank you. And thank you, Stavros, and thank you, Regan. I just had a few questions. A few of my questions have been asked. But how do we keep in contact with the local schools in regards to the shared paths? Because I know a lot of the local kids love, walking or cycling to the school, and evident by the huge increase in the numbers. Do we keep in contact with them to, I guess, the footpaths surrounding the schools? Do they have, I guess, priority, or is that still followed by the regular schedule?
Thank you, Councillor. Actually, with our sustainable transport team, has got an extensive schedule of regular contact with schools, and actually go to schools and provides education programs to the kids, how to use the bicycles and how to cross the roads, and we work that in conjunction with the police. And certainly the school management and teachers and so on are fully integrated into this, onto these educational programs. And as I said earlier, as a percentage of school kids who use walking and cycling to get to school increases, then obviously we need to continue to increase our messages too.
Thank you. And I just have one more question, and Councillor Kumar had partly covered it, and it was regarding the disability access for our shared footpaths and the renewal. Do we liaise with our the disabled community, or do we have a officer that is kept in communication with them in regarding the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities? Do we, when we renew our footpaths, you know, especially with our vision impaired community, do we look into that?
Thank you, Councillor. Well, yes, I think elected members should be aware that there is a what we call a disability reference group operating in Rotorua, and through that group we have regular meetings and discussions, and actually get feedback from them as to what they think the priorities are. As I responded to Councillor Kumar earlier too, is that sometimes the expectations and their ability to deliver in all the expectations are not totally aligned. But nevertheless, the connectivity and the inputs and the feedback from them forms part and parcel of the decisions we make, especially as Regan said, when we renew footpaths, we apply all the new updated code of practice for disabled people and visually impaired and so on, to make sure that we comply with the new regulations, and obviously taking into stock the information we get from the Disability Reference Group.
Thank you. Councillor Yates.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, tēnā korua. Many of our paths are not shared paths, and when I think of a recycling day like today in Koutu, we don't have a grass verge to put our recycling receptacles on. We're also close to a school. We also have members of our community who are disabled. So is there any, I suppose I need a little bit of comfort here, any consideration for our more narrow paths that are around our communities with the advent of the recycling that's come into play? Because on any given day, those footpaths can become very jammed, not only with our cyclists that use Koutu very more frequently, I think, than some of the other main arterials. So if you can provide me with a little bit of confidence around that, please.
The answer is yes. A footpath renewal takes place, not a footpath renewal, any asset renewal has triggers. And the triggers might be the structural condition of an asset, whether it's a pipe or a footpath or a curb or whatever it is, or it may no longer meet relevant standards, or may no longer serve the evolving use of that asset or the function that asset is expected of it. As you said, a footpath in your area or any particular area might be structurally sound, but might not be adequate to accommodate increased use for wheelie bins, refuse collection, other activities, and so on. When we come back to you in the near future with a part of the LTP, you will see the asset management plans for transportation and the infrastructure strategy, into which those things will be highlighted. Sometimes it is a little bit disconnected when we're linking renewal programs exclusively with a depreciated value of an asset, because that's linked to an assigned life expectancy, but does not always take into account the change of use, the change of environmental considerations. And therefore, we will be making an allocation allowance or to accommodate that. How fast we can do that, obviously, that will depend on to you as elected members as to how do you balance your decisions in due course. But certainly, we recognize that, and we are aware that we need to make some changes in those areas. I cannot preempt the amount of priority or the level of priority you want to assign to that, but that's why you have LTP programs to consider in your wisdom as to what do you think the relative priorities are.
Thank you very much. Last question to Mrs. Rothwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Stavros, as well. My question is around the footpaths and the Lakes Community Board areas. A number of them don't seem to have regular proactive maintenance. So are these areas, Lakes Community Board and the rural areas, are they less regularly serviced than the urban areas?
Thank you. No, I don't. There is no differentiation in terms of a renewal process for this footpaths. Probably again, as Regan noted, the average life expectancy is 93 years. And it's sometimes if you haven't seen anything happening for 10 years, you think it's a long time. But in the context of a replacement, 93 years is a long time too. I'm also aware that footpaths in the rural and lakes communities are also part and parcel of our recreation program. And I think that's a combination of an effort between the two parties.
Yeah, I'm thinking of, there's a particular area going through Hamarana where there's actually weeds that have encroached on the pathway and made it so narrow that people in wheelchairs, for example, can't go by. And the people who are able-bodied actually clear their own weeds. They come out with some sort of garden implement and clear the pathway, but there's a number of residents there who don't have the ability to do that.
Look, I can't be specific about a specific location, but I will take it on board and ask our team to look into that. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Stavros and Regan, for your presentations today. That concludes our presentation on the infrastructure group. I now welcome Thomas Collet, who is our Group Manager for Business Support Group, to overview his report, and we are now on page 21 in our agendas. Welcome, Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, councillors. I'm just happy to have any questions on my brief report.
Okay, any questions from the floor? We are on page 21. Yes, Councillor McPherson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The general question is, how's the collection of rates proceeding? I'm getting a number of contacts from people who are stunned by the increased level of rates demand. And I noticed in here we do not anticipate any risk to the rates strike.
No, so just to remind the councillors that in the middle of July, the rates were set, and obviously those rates have then gone to the printers, and at the moment the community has obviously received the rates notices for the first instalment, either via mail or email, and that instalment is due on the 20th of August. So as yet, obviously the rates collection will be determined at August, but we haven't received any indication from anyone that there seems to be an issue.
Thank you. Ms. Bray.
Kia ora, Thomas. The removal of the floating and wetland, do we know what the backstory was to why it failed?
Sorry, I think that's actually a question for Stavros. Sorry, Stavros. Do you mind answering for that? I do believe he covered the wetlands in his presentation.
Through you, Madam Chair, the floating wetland was supported through a series of structural connections that we had storms in the recent years that broke it apart, and actually it became more of a hazard. And we got an initial installer to fix it, but the advice we got at the moment from the engineering perspective and the structural integrity is that it cannot sustain the effects of weather events and so on.
Thank you. Were there any further questions for Thomas? There appear to be none. Thank you very much, Thomas. I now invite Gina Rangi, the Group Manager for Manahotu Māori. We are on page 22 of our agenda now.
Tēnā tātou e te tēpu, kei te mihi atu kia koutou. I'll take my report as read, and I really wanted to just highlight a couple of events over the last month. The first was, of course, Matariki, which is the Māori New Year. Planning for that was really disrupted this year by the impact of the lockdown and the uncertainty that organisations had about when we would come into level 2 and level 1. So much of the Matariki events were carried out online. There was a really outstanding series of videos about the meaning of Matariki that were promoted through Council's social media channels, really beautifully executed and had really high engagement. There were a number of other key events during the month. I won't go into all of them, but I did want to note the Te Arawa Vision, which was launched at Te Puia a couple of weeks ago. Council supported the development of the Te Arawa Vision through a secondment of one of our staff members, and there was an incredible engagement process across Te Arawa, probably one of the first or only processes that I'm aware of nationally where the strategic plans of all of the organisations, entities, hapu, marae, were reviewed and then their themes collected. So I have placed copies around the table, and we will be asking Te Tatau to come present to Council to outline the key planks of the strategy, of the vision. One of the things that we're reflecting on in my team is what that means for Council and how we respond. Obviously, we're not responsible for delivering the vision, but we are a key contributor and partner in the delivery of housing, health, well-being, community well-being, I guess. The other item I wanted to highlight was, as you know, falling out of treaty settlement processes, we do have a number of protocol agreements with different iwi groups. And we did have the Ngāti Rangi Webuhi protocol meeting last month. We have a number of work programs that involve Ngāti Rangi Webuhi, particularly around the provision of fresh water on the west side of the lake. And they have been, we have moved that relationship from a very I would say dysfunctional relationship, sort of 10 years ago, where we had applied for resource consent as council and had been given very strong message from the Environment Court that we needed to change how we engaged with the mana whenua. There's been significant work from the infrastructure team to operationalise that, and we did talk about that in quite some depth at the protocol agreement meeting. One of the things that Ngāti Rangi Webuhi wanted to acknowledge was the support from Council in some of their regional planning processes, and to thank our teams in the strategy and planning team for the support that we gave them in that process. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to respond.
Thank you, Gina. Your Worship, the Mayor.
It's not really a question, but we had the Te Arawa Lakes strategy group yesterday with the program where we discussed the combined program, and we all seem to be coming at the issue of climate change from a council perspective, a regional council's perspective, with their regional iwi forum that they've set up from Te Arawa Lakes Trust, and then in the vision that I'm sure we'll hear about from Te Tato, there is the takiwā, the place, and a point about climate change. I got a bit worried about going around, all of us going out independently to have discussions with our wider community as well on climate change, and I just urge that we have a coordinated approach to this so that we get the community at large and also the iwi perspective together as one, because it's going to be a big issue that we're all facing. But I heard, you know, we will be coming out to consult and hold hui, and then I know that Fisher's work as well with sustainability and resilience that we probably will. So I think we need a combined effort on this.
I wasn't at the meeting yesterday. I was doing some work with Kāinga Ora along with some of the other members of the exec. But it is an issue that I've identified as well. So I'm attending along with Stavros to a regional workshop because I do want to make sure that there is that connection between regional council and also Te Arawa in terms of what we're doing and how we're going about it.
Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Gina, for the report. I just had a question regarding the recent funding for the lakefront cultural overlay. How could you please talk more about how that $1 million will benefit us and what works would be going on there? Thank you.
Well, we've just received the announcement on the funding. So we had a meeting yesterday with the designers, ISMIS, as well as preparing for some engagement with our Ngāti Whakaue advisors on how best to use that money. As you know, the Lakefront project has a considerable amount of conceptual and design work already. So there's already a base of what we could do, and we're looking at how can we use that $1 million to do two things. One, to improve the or to elevate the visual impact of what's happening down there. And so we've got some really cool ideas about sculpture and design work that could be incorporated, with a focus on using local artists. And secondly, how can we improve the storytelling? So potentially, there's a whole lot of stories about the lake, about the land, about the people, intergenerational kōrero, and there are opportunities to use apps, for example, to appropriately tell those stories. That takes a little bit of time to work through with mana whenua, so we'll be meeting with them regularly over the next few weeks to clarify what it looks like. Essentially, we're looking at a number of objectives. One, to improve the visual and elevate the visual impact. Two, to really tell stories in an exciting and memorable way and in an inspiring way. And three, to ensure that as much as it's a tourism and economic development program, it also needs to reflect our local community. So what are the stories that our people want to tell and share?
Thank you. Councillor Kawate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question, and will you be starting the noho marae again for staff?
Yes, we will be. Again, COVID really impacted on that. Our first noho marae program will start 23 and 24 September. So for councillors that aren't familiar, we have an external program deliverer comes in and just helps our team to provide essentially a 2-day program. Many of our staff have never been on a marae before, so it's a really safe environment for them to experience our pōhiri process, to understand what's going on and to have that explained by our staff, to stay on the marae, to learn about the council itself, so understand the values, the vision and the work programs that council carries out. It's often the first time that a lot of them have had the opportunity to stay overnight at a marae. And really just to get an understanding of what resources they have to call on within the organisation if they're facing difficulties in either engaging in Te Arawa communities or providing effective services. I think a lot of our staff are a little bit apprehensive if it's the first time they've been on a marae, and universally they come out of that process excited and feeling really inspired about what they can do to serve the community. So there will be noho marae in September, October and November so that we can catch up. Usually we do it every 2 months, but we're going to intensify it a little because of the impact of the lockdown.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, could I just also comment on the Te Arawa 2050 vision? And I did attend that function. And while I did hear you say, Gina, that it's Te Arawa's document, of course it is, but I think it behoves every councillor to be au fait with Te Arawa's aspirations going forward, because they have definite plans for their lands, their geothermal, for the waters, etc. So it really does, because it never ceases to amaze me that I sit at this table with people who don't know where Ngāti Whakaue lands are, who don't know where Ngāti Pīkeo lands are, Rangati Aorere lands, and I mean, I just believe, and it actually shows the gaps with some of our councillors. So I'm just saying, familiarise yourselves with this. because it's so important. And with the long-term plan as well, it's so important. So this is a great document and a credit to Te Aroha. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson, followed by Maxwell and then Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, Gina. Just my questions around the engagement processes that you have running under your heading of infrastructure. And there's a pretty daunting workload there. And there was some discussion about this in the Lake Strategy Group meeting yesterday, because Regional Council are in the same boat with very tight timeframes to meet engagement around the water management areas for the freshwater management standards that are coming out. So the Rotorua wastewater treatment plant resource consent, that's the bridging consent process that you're...
That's the existing consent applications that are in front of the Environment Court, as well as... so in order to get those consents and then construct the new treatment plant, we need to extend a little bit of time in the forest, so that's the bridging consent as well. So they all come under that umbrella.
So do we have the resources available to, I guess, effectively carry out all of that engagement to get those consents resolved in a timely fashion? That's my question.
I think that's a challenge for both council, regional council, and also the Te Aroha community. There are so many issues, and this is a perennial issue. This is not something unique to this year or even this LTP. If you look at infrastructure alone, there are the wastewater treatment plant processes for Rotorua. There's also Tarawera coming on, there's Rotuiti, there's the comprehensive stormwater consent. So they're all interrelated issues. And one of the things that I am working on with Stavros' team has been, how do we, I guess, elevate the discussion with Hapu to understand what their objectives are, so that we're not having to go out on technical detail all the time, but that we're really clear on what their objectives are for their waterways. That is something that is flagged in both the NPS for freshwater and also regional council programs as well. So we are looking at how can we stop going out on individual projects and actually just get more aligned on what we're trying to achieve as a community. The question of do we have sufficient resources? Well, it's always a challenge, I have to say. In this environment, though, it's difficult. You know, we clearly, as an executive team, are aware of the constraints of the community in terms of paying for the work that we have to do as council. One thing I would say is that engagement draws out the milestones and the achievement of milestones at the beginning of the process. But we have a choice. We can either engage at the beginning or we can engage in litigation. We've learnt the hard way that the latter approach doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's more expensive, and in the long run, it takes longer.
Thank you, and I absolutely tōtoko that final comment. The issue that I guess both councils face with the engagement there underway is that the Hapu and Iwi are asking through their entities who resources them for that engagement as well. So that's part of the challenge as well.
Treaty settlements, I think there's an expectation from many in the community that treaty settlement processes are meant to fund that. That's not the basis on which a settlement quantum or a settlement amount is calculated. The Crown doesn't look at the work program and the demands on iwi in terms of deciding how much. So sometimes treaty settlement processes enable that to be resourced. A lot of the time it doesn't, and people, like ourselves, are working really hard but with very limited resources.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Some really good points you've raised, and thank you for your comprehensive answers, Gina. We move to Councillor Maxwell and then Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Chair. Kia ora, Gina. The question, just a couple of quick questions. The first one I have is the overlay funding for the lakefront, which was announced over a week or two ago. Tremendous. Does the overlay funding include Ohinemutu Village? I'll ask the other question after.
No, we have an application into the CIP for that, and we haven't had a final response on that. So at this stage, no, it doesn't. And we're still waiting to hear from central government on what that looks like.
Yeah. The other one is the sound shell now is clear, and I see in the report further that the land that's there is going to be used for parking in the meantime. How long will that parking be available for any major events in Ohinemutu, things like that?
That's probably a question better to put to Jocelyn, but my understanding is that the total number of car parks doesn't change, although the placement of them might change over time. We have been really mindful of the overflow use for events at Ohinemutu in terms of car parking at the lakefront. So it's something that we're working on to ensure that that's continued. Yeah.
Nice. And I just want to share with everyone else too, and Councillor Rotorua Tate, very good booklet put out by the tribe. I thought excellent. And if you look to page 10, you'll see all the 53 marae around our area, all the marae being named and numbered. And when you think about it, when we have it, we look at it, when we have hearings and various things, and sometimes we don't see submissions coming through from our people, they talk on their maraes, and that's where, and what Metapeka said earlier is correct. If we as councillors can get out even more to our people, 40% of the community, and bring their submissions through there, I think, already we're doing very well with all the partnership programs, but thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And last question to Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, General Rangi. I've got a couple of things to ask, mainly very simple things. But first, I'd like to speak. I was lucky enough to have a look at the Te Arawa 2050 vision, and I believe that that's poetic justice to an aspirations of the future. I believe there were some mistakes that probably were made in the past, that the new generation that can now read a document that is very simply in very good narrative, that could be understood by everybody. It talks about wonderful vision and a partnership. And it's very refreshing to see that a very good pathway has been made for young, aspiring Maoris coming on towards 2050. And I was really fortunate to sort of be able to sort of get my hands on that, to read that. And I hope that I get to learn more. Like fellow Councillor Trevor Maxwell has mentioned about the maraes and all, I didn't have that knowledge about how many maraes were around and what was out there. So this gives us a very good picture. My second question is, I have been lucky to be part of a council that has been very big on porphyries. So I've come to a few, and I think it's very positive and it energizes. But what I've never been part of is anyone departing. Like, there have been very long-serving officials that have worked in the councils for 20, 25, 27 years. A couple of weeks ago, there was one for Mark Paget. I didn't even know he was living. The Infocore staff were privy to come to say farewell to him. So my question really is, if we are really big on porphyries to welcome new staff who are only fledgling chickens into our organization, what about the ones that are leaving after 20, 25, 30 years? What do we do? What is the Manahautu Maori way, or, excuse my ignorance. What is the...
Well, so we call it a poroporoaki, and there is a process to acknowledge and farewell, and it would be feel very familiar. It is a farewell. We do hold those for long-serving staff. Those have traditionally been staff-led, but certainly can we take it on board that there is a request from elected members to know about it and be invited?
Thank you very much. And sorry, Ms. Bray, you had a question as well.
Not a question, but just to fully support what Councillor Maxwell said about taking more community hui out to the marae. I really love that idea, and thank you, Dave, for advising that there was 2 community hui here. But I know from over the years when I've come to the community hui here, you don't get too many ratepayers for all sorts of reasons. They just don't like to come to the council building. So I love that idea of using the marae, and after the noho wānanga with staff, you'll realise that it is a really good place to hold these community hui. Thank you.
Just one last comment. There is a pōhiri for new staff on Monday, so you're most welcome to attend as elected members. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Gina. We now move to the strategy group. I'd like to invite JP to come up to the table. We're on page 24, and JP is the Group Manager of Strategy Group, who will present to his report.
Morning, everyone. I've got a reasonably brief report here today, but I just wanted to highlight some of the things, and it probably carries on from the conversation that we've just previously had about public engagement out in the community and the use of the marae. So there was a meeting at Tama around the housing strategy last week, facilitated by Arapita Tahana. What I wanted to highlight in here is one of the things about the consultation we're trying to undertake at the moment is to make sure there's sufficient time for people to engage, and also using as many different tools and mechanisms to make sure that people have that opportunity to engage. So one of the things we've done with an extended period of consultation around the housing strategy was to produce small videos where we've used either a partner or a stakeholder group to introduce some of the objectives that were identified in that strategy and really talk about why they were important to that particular group or individual. So we've reported in there, Mr. Barrett from LifeWise was one of those videos and sort of had over 8,500 views of that video. So a number of the other ones have seen quite high levels of viewing, and that also gives us the chance to see groups and individuals sharing it out much wider than the council networks as well. So from an engagement perspective, a really important mechanism for us to make sure that we get as much engagement as possible. So yeah, really positive use within the communications department of those different tools, different approaches, and making sure that when we engage on strategies, it's with our partners as well. So happy to answer off any other questions, councillors.
Thank you, JP. Are there any questions? This is for page 24 and 25. There appear to be none. Thank you very much, JP. Now, just in response to a question that was raised earlier by Councillor McPherson, we've looked to bring forward what would be suitable from the confidential section, and we'll ask Thomas to make a presentation on how we as Rotorua Lakes Council manage the contracts and also the variations. So I'll refer to our Chief Executive just to introduce Thomas and what he's able to share in this part of our meeting.
Thank you. Just through the chair, councillors, committee members, through the chair, I've asked for Thomas to make this presentation to you. I think earlier on the comment was made, which I think was something like the word blowout was used, which is a somewhat emotive term in the context of a managed contract variation. So I think it's appropriate for Thomas at this time just to provide you with an overview as to the approach that staff use with respect to both contract management and where variations actually fit into that process.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning again, councillors. Look, this is a presentation that we've put together, which was intending to do a little bit later, so obviously brought it forward. It's going to take a little bit of time to go through it, and happy to have any questions at the end of it. So I guess just a little bit of a background on what is a contract. I know at last week's council meeting, we had some questions around contracts and leaving contracts and what does it mean and breaches and so forth. So just a bit of a reminder that a contract effectively is a binding agreement between two parties. One offers something and the other accepts something, and it's generally for goods or services or the use of intellectual property, etc., etc. The contract clearly sets out the terms of the agreement and generally tries to get rid of any ambiguity or sets in mechanisms of how to deal with the ambiguity, whether it's how to exit the contract, how to mediate any disputes during the contract, how it deals with variations, etc. And both parties obviously agree, and then services and contracts and those sorts of things are engaged. And so the types of contracts we have as an organisation is actually quite vast. The first three are what we call NZS 3910 contracts. So they are actually industry standard contracts used throughout New Zealand, and they're usually in a very prescribed format, and you very rarely deviate from those standards because they're standards considered across New Zealand and the industries. The ones ending in 10 are construction contracts where you effectively engage someone to construct something. The NZ 3916 are design and build. So in the first one, you already know what you're constructing, so you get a contract to construct it. For the second one, you effectively say, please, this is what we're after, please design it and also construct it. Versus then maintenance contracts of those assets, and then into some more simpler ones with regards to contracting for services. You might be engaging a consultant, a lawyer or an accountant, and then more short form agreements for minor transactions. And so typically when we talk to you about contracts, we generally talk about those NZS 39 contracts, which are those big contracts usually used or predominantly used for construction of physical assets. I guess the reason why there's a whole range of contracts is because one size doesn't fit all. And so you do have to find the one that is suitable. And when in doing so, you generally rely on a number of considerations, and I'll quickly touch on these. One of the big considerations is, where do you want the allocation of risk to sit? So that's the question being asked around, do you want a fixed price or do you want to be flexible in the price? And also around, therefore, who carries that risk? So as you de-risk, you know you're pushing that risk to someone else, that you're having to pay for that risk because the other party is taking that risk on board, and so therefore needs a financial mechanism or a buffer to ensure that any risks associated with a project are able to be absorbed into those elements of it. What are the opportunities? So you can go a fixed price agreement or build widget A, but sometimes there might be other opportunities with regards to as you start on that project. And so you could be pulling up a footpath and redoing a footpath. You may want to have flexibility that actually there might be a stormwater pipe that runs underneath of it or a water main, and you may like flexibility in the contract that as you are looking at one thing, there's an opportunity to leverage and do another thing while you are there, rather than coming back, digging back up a footpath and then doing the other item underneath. So sometimes you have to look at what's the appropriate mechanism to consider the potential opportunities that may lay ahead. Other ones are service requirements. So bearing in mind that when the asset is constructed, how are we going to look after that asset in the future? And what are the mechanisms of when that asset is constructed that we can maintain that asset going forward? Value for money mechanisms and procedures for, I guess, contract management. One of the types, or the predominant type that we talked about, are contracts whereby they are lump sum or fixed price contracts. When we do these, we generally transfer the risk, the majority of the risk, to the contractor, but we get price certainty. It also reduces the management requirements because we're very clear on what we want, and the contractor is very clear on how to deliver that. And so we don't actually need a lot of certainty around the pricing schedules and the specifications because effectively we have contained the project within an agreed cost. And a good example of that is a toilet block. We obviously spec out the toilet block, we do drawings, we talk about what our requirements are, We talk about the level of specification that we have, and then we go to the market and we price that up. And then we select a contractor based on obviously suitable qualifications, experience, and price. And then we lock in that price, and the contractor therefore delivers that toilet block, as an example. Another type of contract is the most common is measure and value. So measure and value is you're effectively agreeing with the contract a shopping list and the price of that shopping list. And so it's used where the work that you're doing is, you may not know the full quantity of what's required, but you know the types of items that you want, lengths of pipe, lengths of footpath, those sorts of items, and you agree up front on the price of those products, but know that as you enter into that contract, you may need 100 of them, or you may need 120 of them, or you may need 80 of them. As you go through the project, that detail, I guess, is more known. And it's good where you can alter a project as you go, but knowing that you have the price certainty of that agreed shopping list. And I guess if I use a simple analogy of comparing the two that I've talked about, in this first one, I can go to the supermarket or I can go to a bakery shop and I can buy a cake. And I can buy a carrot cake that's got icing and everything on it. And I'm going to pay a price for that. And you know that when you go to a shop and buy a cake, it could be a $30 cake. Alternatively, I can go to the supermarket and I can access those prices of goods of buying the flour and buying the yeast and buying the icing and putting that together. And I need to obviously have a good understanding of how to bake that cake and knowing that the cake that I'm going to get at the end. Whereas on the other one, I know exactly I'm going to buy something off the shelf. The third type that we generally use as well is cost reimbursement. And so this is predominantly used for emergency works or smaller type projects like a re-roof of a building or those sorts of things. And so you agree in principle on the quantum of work, and you work really closely with the contractor on that work to manage obviously the pricing and the output. Obviously, though, that we have challenges in managing contracts, and everyone in their own personal life, whether they've built a house or they've entered into other sorts of contracts, knows that these things are always not simple. So some of the things that we have to deal with is changing of scope of a project as you start a project. There's always unknown and unforeseen issues and risks. So just like you can take your car into a mechanic and say, hey, there's a knocking, can you please fix it? It is common for a mechanic to come back and say, and by the way, X, Y, and Z, or a plumber coming in and saying, you think you're doing this, but as we've pulled it apart, by the way, and so everyone in our lives has come across situations where we've engaged a contractor to do something and then find at times that unknown things have been found. Another issue is lack of supplier performance. So the need for us as an organisation to proactively manage our contractors so they are turning up, they're doing the things that they're saying they're doing, they're putting the things into the ground that we've asked them to be put in to ensure that therefore they are delivering. Change in costs as projects can take a long time. If you haven't got an agreed price list at the start, that the cost of goods can change during the length of a project. Poor communication, particularly between us as an organisation and the contractor, but also the contractor back to us. Poor scoping. This is something that many organisations struggle with regards to not fully understanding the scope of what it is that you're doing and that you're about to engage contractors on, and then a lack of us not engaging in it. And these are all things that we have to manage when we manage our contracts. So I guess how do we do that is, and I guess there's a little bit of slide missing here of, it's something that we've been focusing on as an organisation for quite some time. About 2 to 3 years ago, we established our project management office, and the project management office was focused solely on understanding and improving the way that we as an organisation deliver our projects. And the team at the moment is about 5. We've significantly increased the number of qualified project managers. We're focused heavily on internal training for our existing staff that deliver projects, and we've seen a really good improvement in the capability of our staff with regards to managing projects. In addition, all our major projects actually have steering groups. So, the Waka Forest, the lakefront, the museum, the Performing Arts Centre, the Aquatic Centre, the housing project, and even the wastewater projects all have steering groups. And those steering groups are made up of generally an executive sponsor, whereby they hold the vision of what is looking to be achieved. Some of them have elected members on to see and be informed of the progress. And all of them also have the key executive members and also key senior management with regards to ensuring, therefore, that as issues arise in these projects, they're dealt with accordingly and managed accordingly, and ultimately that what we promised and what we said we were going to deliver at the start actually is delivered and delivered well. Just as well, each of those projects also have qualified project managers with many years of experience. There's a mixture of internal capability and external. So as an example, the Waka Forest, we have an internal individual, Will, who comes from DOC, who has long experience with regards to managing projects for Department of Conservation. The lakefront has an external qualified, large organisation, Bay of Plenty Wide, Veros. The museum has WSP Opus, part of a multinational, I guess, with regards to project management experience. Performing Arts, and I could keep going on as well. So, as I said, we do focus heavily on having the right people and having the right discussions and having the right contracts in place. But the reality is, variations do occur. Doesn't mean, though, that that these just things unhappen. It doesn't mean that the project is being managed poorly. And if I liken it back to, you may be building a deck, and you may go to Bunnings and you may buy all the things you need, and then you start building that deck, and how many other trips do you need to go back to Bunnings, because it might be that unforeseen things occur as you commence on these sorts of projects. But the key is that our contracts allow for these. These are known that you have variations, and every time we enter into a contract, it has the appropriate mechanism to deal with it. And so those mechanisms in the contract really do allow you to deal with some of the issues that we've talked about before. Change in scope, change in price, some of those sorts of elements. But in particular, how we deal with the predominantly of these is through the variations, is through contingencies. And what we used to do in the past was when we let contracts out to contractors, we would let the amount out that was agreed, and we would also include into the contract the contingency amount. And each contract has a contingency amount to deal with the unknowns. And what we actually found historically was we weren't getting a lot of variations. And that was because we were always going to pay out the contingency amount. And so what we now do is we let the contract based on the agreed piece of work, but the contingency amount that we have in our budgets, we retain to ourselves, so therefore we can have the discussion with contractors as the need arises to enter into those variations. And as a result, as a whole, we've actually driven the cost of our projects down, because in many cases we're not actually fully utilising the contingency. And bearing in mind the contingency is the element whereby when you set the budget for us and agree that something might cost $1 million, we will likely therefore go and say, this may be 900,000, and as an example, we may leave 100,000 as a contingency, but the contract initially would be awarded as 900,000. But from a budget perspective, it still fits. And I might just cross over into the Forest Hub too, if that's okay, because I did sit on the steering group, and I know Jocelyn's going to talk a little bit about this as well. And we did have that variation a little while ago. Every single one of those variations went in front of the steering group, and every single one of them was discussed around the rationale of what it was. And I remember them clearly. And Will over here was the project manager, and The first one was around the event space, and there was pushing clearfell and there was levelling the event space off, and it was found that actually the level of the event space was not meaning that it was going to adequately drain. And so we went about and we scraped more of the hill off and we put more fill in, and we got the event space that was fit for purpose. And it was a decision with regards to the steering group to ensure, therefore, that that space was fit for purpose for the future, and ensuring that what the community expected of that space was delivered. And it came about because of unforeseen circumstances as the work took place. But it was always done in knowing that it was going to fit within the overall budget that council had set. Yes, it was a variation to the contract, but it was a change. And there were two others in there as well. The Okaraka water supply that we talked about as part of supplying the water to that area. It was a recognition that the opportunity arose to secure and to make the Okaraka water supply more resilient. Now, that wasn't known at the start. And so we as an organisation elected, therefore, to do that. And in doing so, it was a variation to the contract, but it was a decision that again was made that would dip into the contingency and ensure that that project is still on budget and still within the budget. And there are another couple of other minor items as well, and another one, for example, was the power supply. We had a lot of discussion around the size of the, what's it called, Will? The generator? No, the transformer. Yeah, we'd initially spec'd something, but understanding the vision of that site, the things that were needed there, we actually elected to double the size of that transformer to future-proof it, because it made no sense for us to do it a certain size and then find out 2-3 years later actually it needed something else. So we made conscious decision. But we did that as well, knowing that it would still fit within the budget that was set. And I think that's, I guess, the key with regards to how we deal with variations. Very few, if any, lead to variations that mean we exceed budget. Most, if not all, of our contracts have a contingency in them. The contingency deals with variations. So when people say we've had a blowout at Hub 2, we've had a variation to contract, but it's still being delivered within the budget that you have set us.
Thank you very much, Thomas. I'll just ask the Chief Executive to make some comments as well.
Thank you, Chair. Look, and what I would urge members of the committee and council to be very cautious in the use of emotive comments or criticism. The issue that we have is that variations are a professional, expected part of effective contract management. That is the reality. We can easily, and as I've said previously, eliminate variations simply by, as Thomas has indicated, increasing the contingency levels in contracts, and equally so we can transfer more risk to the contractors. Now, the reality of both of those are that, yes, you will see less variations, but you'll see the net cost of actually our contracts also increasing on the basis of increased contingency levels and also increased movement of risk to the contractors. What we instead do is to focus on looking to achieve the best value with respect to the outcomes that we're achieving at the best cost possible. Now, those are important considerations. So where we see either a compromise with respect to the potential value being achieved, as in Forest Hub 2 that Thomas has just covered, we actually look to bring a variation back to you to ensure that the value that you are expecting to see is actually achieved. Secondly, we don't expect to see large contingencies built into contracts. What those contingencies do is to inflate the potential cost of the contract in such a way that we limit effectively, or have to limit, the nature of the activities that this organisation undertakes. So what I would urge you is that when you are considering variations to contracts, that you actually do so on the basis that you are dealing with a well-managed professional organisation that is bringing to you prudent decisions. They should not be seen as signs to find fault unnecessarily or to use emotive language, the consequences of which can have significant effects with regards to the way in which we approach the management of contracts in this organisation.
Thank you very much. I'll open it up to just a few questions. Your Worship, the Mayor, followed by Councillor McPherson.
Yes, look, I just want to say thank you for that presentation, and thank you, Councillor Bentley, for saying could parts of it come into public. Because last term, we were very concerned as elected members around project management, and we asked for a change around managing risk and contracts, and that's how Amy got the role. And those projects are then reported to Audit and Risk that we as chairs are privy to, and wider council isn't. So that was about putting rigour into managing what we were entering into, some huge work programs again about project management. And I'm very confident about the rigour around how these huge projects that we embarked on, ambitious, are being managed. I too suggest great caution, especially on social media. This is where we can cause commercial offence. And it may be you want to flick it off to the Harmful Digital Communications Act, but I think we as councillors must exercise probity and judgment around criticism of contract management. And if councillors have concerns, Thomas is always there to actually help take you through your concerns about contract management. That's the right approach. I just please say don't go onto social media and use words like blowout without first coming to those that are managing these processes. This is really critical because it's also part of what's now in the public domain about causing offence in the past and how we manage it going forward. So it's great you gave us this presentation in public today, and I'm glad that the commercial sensitivity component will be managed in confidential to protect those that are going to be having relationships with us on other projects. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you for your presentation. Through the chair. Thank you for your presentation and your comments, Chief Executive. Classifying critical feedback from the public as emotional, I'm not sure if it really covers the ground effectively with regard to public accountability. Today in the presentation you gave a general background to the nature of contracting and how variations come to arise. And you did it towards the end, then addressed the actual substance of the changes required in the Hub 2 contract. But the second part of my question, right at the beginning of this meeting, was how will we prevent such blowouts? Because that's a colloquial term that's being used.
Your point of order, Your Worship. Yes, sorry, the microphone wasn't on, but just to reiterate, the point of order was around the words blowout. I think we were quite clear that that's not the correct word to use for this, and the reference on emotive language was on the word blowout, not on the public, just to clarify that point as well. But we do take your points, Councillor McPherson, that is why we've asked to move this into the public section of this.
Thank you.
And I think we will move on into the next councillor. So, Councillor Kaifo.
Oh, sorry, I hadn't finished my question. My comment. Can I proceed?
Yes.
Thank
but
you.
I will
I'm happy to withdraw the word blowout.
For the point of order, please just make sure that you aren't using emotive language.
So we'll take out the word blowout and use the word variation. And the key question, the second part of my question was, how are we going to prevent such 20% as an excessive variation? And you've indicated in your description how over a period of time, the last few years, there have been significant changes to the way in which project management has been conducted and the related components of public accountability, which I appreciate because they point to a process of learning. Sorry, Tim. Sorry to interrupt your interruption. So my question is, what are the learnings that will be drawn from the Hub 2 experience? Thank you.
I'm going to take a slightly different approach. The Hub 2 experience is actually a really good example of how it works well. It's not an actual example of how it works poorly. And coming back to I think the paper that Jocelyn presented, was it last week or the week before on this? It was made very clear that the variation was well within the budget of the project. It was not putting the project over budget, and a clear explanation of why we did it. And if I come back to it, one large component of that was to ensure that the event space was fit for purpose for our community, not just in the short term and the long term. The worst thing we could have done was stuck to contract and had an event space that had poor drainage, and then would have to come back at a later date at even greater expense to fix it up. And on the second component around the water supply, again, another good example of picking the opportunity to kill two birds with one stone. And so hence those two alone are the majority of the variation. And I would argue that through good project management, through good discussion across our organisation, it actually was managed very well in the way that it should be managed. Sorry, Councillor, I think you said it was a blowout, and I was explaining that this is a good example. It's not a blowout. It was within budget and is actually working exactly as it should.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes, Councillor Donaldson.
The assertion that there are learnings to be made is contrary to the explanation that's just been given, that it's been very well managed. There's nothing to learn on that side of the equation. There's something to be learned by others around the table.
Okay. We'll move on from this because we're starting to argue across the table, but I think there was some very clear learnings there that actually it was a really good thing and this is very well managed, and I think that's that. So we'll move on to Councillor Kaiwhao.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Thomas. Very good presentation. Just two things. One is just when you're looking at the contractors, how does term fit into the overall expectation around a good contract? So a term that allows us to have sufficient, I suppose, best bang for your buck, but also a term that allows enough flexibility for a changing environment or a change in council's direction. That was just one, I suppose, piece that I didn't see in that slide.
Good question. That is something that we take into account, and I think there's going to be a discussion later on that as well, whereby we've looked at the initial term of a panel of contract suppliers. We manage their performance. Once we're happy with it, we could either extend, and so we have that flexibility of picking the time frame so we can manage the risks associated with that. Yep. Or appropriate mechanisms in the contract to extend the contract if required. Yep.
Okay, and just, Madam Chair, one last question. It was just around the COVID-19 situation with the variation, I think, was for the COVID-19, and it's a discussion that I've had with some members of staff. It's just to review contracts or new contracts so that, because we don't know whether we might go back into another lockdown situation, how a variation would be handled, because under the current contracts it would simply be force majeure. The risk should fall on the contractor, but I think Rob gave an explanation at the last presentation that council should take a good, I'm not sure what the wording was, community approach to it, but it's how do you share that risk in a COVID-19 situation and making sure that our contracts are robust enough that we're not then having to keep on having discussions with contractors around how that cost is allocated.
I'll ask the Chief Executive to answer. Thanks.
I think you've characterised it quite well. That the issue with our contracts is that they are an agreement between two parties. And the risk for council here, of course, is that our contractors actually see us as a good organisation to work with. That's pivotal in order for us to actually achieve the value, both in terms of the contracts which are affordable, but also which derive value. So we've got to be seen as a good organisation to work with. Now, our contracts, as you correctly highlighted, with respect to the lakefront, actually allowed us to say to the contractor, this is all your risk, and we are not going to enter into recognition of any costs that you've achieved whatsoever. Now, that's the situation that we were in. What we instead brought back to you is a view to say that we wished to act as a good partner to our contractor and to recognise some of those costs, and that's what we did. Now, I don't think this is an issue to be dealt with in the contract. It's an issue actually that we evidence in the way that we behave as a partner to our contractor when we're actually working with them to acknowledge variations, to acknowledge cost changes in a way that is actually appropriate. We can easily act, if you like, through our contract quite harshly, but that doesn't overall sometimes, whilst it may actually result in a positive outcome from council's perspective with respect to that immediate contract, I think it's well worthwhile remembering that our contractors are dealing with us in many situations, and we rely on the contracting environment to contractors to come back to us and say, council's a good agency to work with, and we want to work with them, we want to keep working with them. So it's a good faith agreement, I think, that we focus on with respect to these sort of variations, and that's what happened with regard to the COVID-19 situation for the lakefront.
Madam Chair, can I just make a comment? I was actually talking about going forward so that it actually gives certainty to both council and to the contractor if that situation ever occurred again with a lockdown or a government mandated stop work, so that otherwise going forward, if that happened again, we've got so many contracts, and if we're having to negotiate one by one as to what is a COVID-19 variation. So I'm just wondering if that's an opportunity going forward to give certainty to both. That's really...
I think the problem is that we can't give certainty in an uncertain world. That's the challenge for us. So just to try and paint a little bit more of the picture, in for example, our wastewater services area, clearly that under a COVID environment, if we were to go back into level 4, that would be an essential service. So the certainty is that whatever happens around COVID for an essential service, you will still be required to provide those services, as opposed to the likes of a build on the lakefront where it's not an essential service, so therefore there's going to potentially be disruption in the contract. And there'll be various variations of that all the way through, depending very much on the nature of the activity. I think the confidence that we should provide to our contractors that we're looking to provide services or procure services from is that we are a good organisation to partner with. And I don't think that's really a matter in the contract. It's more a matter in the way that we work and our contractors expect to work with us.
Thank you for clarifying. We've got Councillor Rokawate, Mr Hurd, the Mayor, and then Councillor Donaldson, and we'll move on. Councillor Rokawate.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I'm not sure if I'm confused or what, but thank you for the explanation. And I fully appreciate that we have to do things for the best of council, obviously, and we're looking for the best deal that we can get. But whenever I hear variation, to me it suggests that something's gone a bit awry. In another position, I have a contract worth millions of dollars with the government for services, to provide services. Believe me, there is no variation that I can come up with and ask them for some more leeway or something like that. So you're right, there are different types of contracts. And to reduce variations, I heard you say, Jeff, that we could then increase the contingency. And there's something that, I'm going to say smells, and here we are everyone's getting emotive about language and things, or, but there's something that I wonder what our contractors, if one of them was sitting in the public gallery listening to the rationale or the justification for how we, look at our contracts and manage our contracts or manage the variations, I wonder whether they would give us the thumbs up. I'm not sure. I've heard you say, Jeff, that this is the way that the contracts are managed and we've got to, the risk and everything. I've heard the explanation, but something about this does not sit well with me. And I'm not sure if we're trying to shaft, oh, that's another word, isn't it? The contractors, or shaft the contract. What's a nice word? I'm trying to think of but it's something like that. But I'm not sure if this doesn't sit well with me. You've explained it all, but whenever I see variation, I think hello. And then I think, no, but I just want to thank you. I'll just get this out, because we awarded a contract and there were other contenders for that contract or tenderers for that contract. With the various variations that might come up, that contract, the second one down, might have been actually the one that could have got it in the first place in terms of price-wise. Maybe I'm getting it all wrong.
I'm very sorry. I will draw it to a conclusion there, because I think we're getting a bit outside of the scope of this presentation and also the purpose of it. And I think, the type of contracts that they're dealing with are very different to the social sector. We're dealing with products, services, manufacturing, the whole ripple effect of the costs of that then comes onto the contractors, that then comes into the project, and it is a moving beast, so there's many different variables to it. I know it's well managed by a project management office, but I will just get the Chief Executive to make some short comments on that, but I think I certainly feel confident and assured that we have the best experts working on this advising us, so thank you.
Look, Councillor O'Cartate, I'll just briefly make a couple of comments. And in my view, variations are most certainly not a bad thing. And why I say that is that I have seen in other localities contracts delivered exactly as per specification. And when the community looked to go and visit the playground which was the subject of the contract, or they visit the car park that was subject to the contract, they look at it and say, that doesn't work. And not everything that is designed and looks right at the commencement is actually right when you actually start the build. And that quite often people look at the progress of a contract and say, gosh, this is actually simply not going to work. And they have got the choice at that moment to say, do we just continue on and deliver something that's not going to work, or do we actually change it because we know change is necessary? And what you've heard in Forest Hub 2 is a change where there was an opportunity identified to actually deliver value in two ways. One is to provide greater resilience to the Okeraka water supply. Now, we could have ignored that opportunity and said it doesn't matter, but our staff said the resilience to the Okeraka water supply was worthwhile actually making a variation for. A second variation which was alluded to was, I think, a variation with regards to the height of the curbing in Forest Hub 2. Now, when our staff looked at that, they saw that by changing some of the original design, they could achieve better long-term use of actually some areas of Forest Hub 2. Now, again, they could have actually ignored that, but instead they've come back and said this variation is worthwhile because it maximises the value of Forest Hub 2. So in that situation, they've again put in a variation. Equally so, when you say, how would our contractors want to be treated? How do they expect to be treated? We can lock contracts so tight that the contractor, regardless of circumstance, wears the cost of the contract. On the lakefront project, with regard to the lockdown period, we had a contractor in a situation where fundamentally they had some significant increase in costs. The contract potentially allowed us to say, well, that's your problem. But instead what we brought back to you was a variation that allowed us to recognise some of the costs that the contractor had actually incurred, and for council to take on some of those costs regardless that we didn't need to in the contract. So those are variations where, one, we're achieving best value for our community, and two, that we're acting as a best partner, a quality partner to our contractors. And so I think that your concerns are actually being very much covered off in those examples.
And also just a reminder, the variations do come back to the committee and to the council, so we are ultimately accountable and do have that responsibility to choose whether we do think it's a good decision or not. So we'll move on to Mr. Hurd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just following up on that, and speaking as someone that's managed hundreds of contractors and contractors over a long period of time, I like the idea of not disclosing the contingency to the contractor, because it automatically gets soaked up by them if you do. We all know that. But it does lead on to the need to report a little bit more detail, I think, to the people around this table to get the sense of comfort that we're all seeking. And I note that you keep saying we're still within the 40 million, we're still within the 40 million, and no doubt we are. But if we could see a breakdown of that with some of the subsets of it, stage 1, 2, 3, articles 4 to 7, whatever they are, and know where we sit on each of them, I think that would give the comfort that we're seeking. We're only looking at a little bit of the puzzle and wondering what the rest of it is. We're looking at 10% of it at a time or less, and wondering what's in the other 95%. But that's not my question, sorry, that was just a comment. My question is real simple. How do you manage overlays of things like, that aren't financial, things like buying local, wood first, etc.? How do you manage those things when awarding contracts?
As an example for wood first and buy local, you're aware that we generally deal with it at the procurement stage. And so as an example, the visitor centre for Long Mile, we spec'd out exactly with regards to the requirement, preferably wood first, local, and all the people that responded to them had to demonstrate that they were actually local, and if they weren't local, they weren't considered. So we can do it at that procurement stage. And also, if we cast the net a bit wider, we have that 5% factor that once we've gone through pretty much all the evaluations, and if the price is within 5%, that we have to look at the local. So even if it costs more, we have that option of doing that as well. And I guess thirdly, it's quite topical at the moment, and I was just speaking to my colleague JP about the localism and really driving that through our organisation. Kerry Starling, who is our procurement lead, who keeps us very safe, has been a bit of a nag to me at the moment as well, around the need to really get more stricter and really drive that, and that's just something that we're doing at the moment, and particularly post-COVID-19, to really ensure that we drive that localism. But the two ways that we generally deal with it is be very clear up front with regards to when we go to market around our expectations. It's either wood first, you have to be local, or towards the end, if there's an opportunity to pass that work on.
Thank you, and I'll just ask the remaining speakers to be very brief, please, with your questions. We have Your Worship the Mayor, then Councillor Donaldson and Councillor Kumar.
I think just a question, Thomas, for learning for new councillors really, is where in the past on projects, and I don't want to go back to legacy issues, have we found things halfway through a project that suddenly caused a variation, like the library, like the Howard Morrison Performing Arts Centre? Just give a few examples, because it's a good learning.
I might actually, you've put him very much on the spot, because I know there are a lot.
I think he knows them.
So perhaps when we go into the confidential, we could go into more details on those, but we certainly know that there is a history of it. Thank you. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, probably to Chief Executive, I like the comments around confidence in council as a partner in contracts, and I think, we're outcomes focused, and I just would appreciate your thoughts on how important that is in getting the best outcomes and the best competition for projects. It was reassuring to see 11 expressions of interest in the visitor centre, for example. And so, we're never going to get stunning projects unless we get good competitive bids for them. And the other question I just had was what's the total value of projects that we're managing right now?
The total value of capital projects that we're trying to get underway at the moment is in excess of $120 million and growing. I guess what we have, our average monthly spend at the moment on capital projects is about $6 to $7 million at the moment. So that demonstrates that we've got a sizable program underway.
I think there's a number of things that have happened. Thomas has alluded to the fact that we've reduced contingencies and contracts, reduced the size of contingencies. I'm very aware that Thomas and the procurement team and with the support from Amy and the PMO, we've substantially increased our active management of contracts. So in one way, I think we are an entity now that in part is actually harder to deal with. And by that I mean that actually that's a good thing. As I think Mr. Hurd alluded to, we're not a soft touch by any means whatsoever with respect to being able to achieve contingencies at ease. We're in fact actively managing our contracts and our contractors in a way to ensure that we're getting good value. So I think that's a positive change that has occurred over the last period of time. But equally so, I think that what I can see, and you can see it with the number of contract bids that we have coming through of recent years, we're also a preferred partner for contracts. And so what we are not short of at this point is that when we go out to market, we're most certainly not short of actually contractors putting proposals to us for the work that we're actually putting into the market.
Thank you. And last question from Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Thomas. Thomas, what I believe you showed us today about projects is something anybody can go on Google as well to see how projects are managed. Some, like around this table, have managed a lot of projects. What I didn't get was that analogy of baking that you use. You stuff up a cake, you can go back to the supermarket or go back to your cupboard and bake another cake. The cost is not that significant. But to come over here and ask a question and use a word, then be told that it could be under the harmful digital act as offensive, I find that when I made a promise to a lot of people that I came to stand and represent over here, I didn't tell them that I was never going to ask the tough questions or use these words. Now it's come to a stage where we have to call a fish by something else as not to offend people or a generation of fish or whatever.
Councillor Kumar, order. I get where you're coming from, but I think it's been a bit misleading. We've been given a very well informative presentation today. That's pretty clear that we need to use language that's correct, and using language that's incorrect is not a good way to be a leader or representative of this council. And quite frankly, I think our public would expect better. So if you do have a question or a point, then please go ahead, but just remind you that we just need to be making sure that we're not misleading.
Madam Chair, I will not beg for your ignorance on that because it was not misleading. Anyway, there's no point in asking the question.
Well, thank you very much. We will now take a short break for 15 minutes and we will return at 11:45.
contracting. Just with regards to Sir Howard Morrison Performing Arts Centre, poor scoping obviously has left us in a frustrating position. That's how I'll encapsulate, but let alone the impact of COVID-19. Can you tell us if the timeline of the completion has been affected at all, noting that it is due to commence in September?
Well, kia ora. We are finishing our geotechnical reports and making sure we get all our peer reviews completed. We are still on track to deliver by September next year, somewhere between July and September next year, but that really is dependent on us being able to get our quotes formalised and bring them forward to the council for approval. So obviously we need a contract in place that has been reviewed by councillors and approved.
Thank you. Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the Chair, I'd just like to say thank you to Jocelyn for a question I asked last month in Operations Monitoring regarding the leaky buildings and hazardous buildings in sanitary. Jocelyn quickly facilitated a meeting with me and Daryl, and we went through the issues concerned, and we sort of ironed it out. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just forgive me, are you the person I talked to about parking?
Yes.
That's wonderful. I saw in the paper yesterday that they have an idea in Palmerston North which for a $20 annual payment, or $10 or something, people can apply for, pensioners, could apply for a parking sticker which allows them 2 hours free parking between 9 and 12 during the week. Have we considered something like that for our parking?
I know we haven't made any consideration of that in particular, but I'm happy to follow it up and come back.
Thank you. Ms. Spray.
Kia ora, Jocelyn. I was approached by a member of the public who received a ticket the day of lockdown down on East Street, just as the Prime Minister announced that all restaurants and cafes had to close. So she was really upset about that, and it's now gone to court. Do you know anything about that particular day, that tickets were still issued?
Point of order, Madam Chair. We don't usually discuss individual issues, but you take them up with the council officer after the meeting. We don't usually bog down a discussion on strategy and policy with individual cases.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. And just confirming, we'll get that followed up with you. Were there any further questions? There appear to be none. Oh, sorry, yes, Your Worship.
Yes, just particularly about the museum education. Now, I'm not sure, it's the fit out of the museum, not so much the project, that I know how the project is progressing. But with the fit out of the museum and exhibitions, are we looking at an exhibition on Te Mana o Te Wai and our story of the waters in Rotorua as being part of the future of what we can show at the museum?
Kia ora. At this point, we are very early on in the thinking around our exhibition and what it will look like. I would expect there will be a level of engagement with our community to ensure that we are providing an exhibition that they're actually going to want to come and see. So I'm happy to take that back and present that. Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, Jocelyn. Mine was about 831, just consenting, and just a general question, because your report covers the number of building consents for quite a constrained period, just a month of June. But compared to last year, are you able to tell us whether consents, the pressure that the consents team are working under, and how are consents tracking relative to last year? I know, we've had this disruption, but we're now out of lockdown. Any comments there, please?
Kia ora, and I'd just actually like to acknowledge one of my team who handed me a piece of paper as I walked in here that actually has that answer on it. So amazingly, they must be reading your mind. So Jason's done a great job. In the year that we've just had, we had 170 homes consented. The last financial year, which was 2019, we had 186, and the year before that there were 153. So I'd say a bit of growth, and I'd say probably the 170 down from 186 probably just reflects the COVID lockdown years.
Thank you. Now, in here there was part on page 26, lakefront development. Now, I know we have some drone footage, and I wonder if we were able to show the committee it today?
Yes, that would be great.
Excellent. Okay. Oh, just confirming that there's no sound, but as you can see, this is just some drone footage of the lakefront development project as it's been going. There are also pictures on page 26.
Just the area that's just flown over, see those little pins sticking out? So that's the pad there is a concrete pad with micro piles. So that's where the boardwalk plinths will bolt down. As you would have seen, they curved quite a way inwards. So where we're going now is just more along where the boardwalk is hard on the lake edge, and there's some terracing that we'll start to see in this next images. So there's a variety of layers where they're working on several terraces that will be in the water and a retaining wall, and then the boardwalk moves further back out to the left of the image in the eastern end.
And this was taken in July?
Yes. Yes. So it's pretty recent footage. A lot of the other infrastructure there is related to that work that we talked about at the earlier meeting around geostabilising the area, so making sure that everything is firm and strong and able to hold the structures that are going on it. I think this is just a repeat.
It's
starting again.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And if there are no further questions, yes, Councillor McPherson.
I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank both Jocelyn and Stavros for the help that their staff have given me on individual inquiries from members of the public. They do a great job in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jocelyn. Thank you. So we now go into our public excluded session. But before we do, we have a very long-serving councillor that tried to get away with not telling us it's his birthday. So we want to wish you, Councillor Maxwell, a very, very happy birthday for today. I won't dare ask you what number it is, but we do have a little cupcake for you. So,
Ra whānau kia koe, ra whānau kia koe, ra whānau kia Uncle Trevor, ra whānau kia koe.
No, he made it.
And we're very prudent, so you didn't get the icing either. But thank you very much. We now go into a resolution to go into public excluded. So I will advise that there are 4 items for consideration in the public excluded session. The first one is the remaining of the lakefront stage 2, professional services for infrastructure, bus shelter installation and maintenance, and adoption of engineering code of practice. The reasons they're in confidential is due to commercial sensitivity and to enable commercial or industrial negotiations. I ask for a mover and a seconder for the motion to move into public excluded. Moves Mr. Hurd, seconded Councillor Kumar. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. And we'll just give 2 minutes to turn off live stream and clear the chambers.